So you know that it belongs to the web prototyping theme. So in principle, all of you now have a domain on a server. You have already a blog, a basic website, just based on HTML. And now it's time to get that website a bit more interesting. And PHP is one way of doing that. First of all, let's start with a bit of feedback with your performance so far. It's not great, unfortunately. That's the number of submissions I've got for the first 5 activities. So we started with 158, which was not extraordinary, knowing that it was a class of 180. Then I lost 10 people the second week, 9 more people the third week, so it's not going well. Okay. If we extrapolate, by Easter, nobody will be submitting any activity anymore, which is not great news. Activity 4, we have only 1 week left, and again, very few people have submitted. Activity 3 is particularly worrying because it's about getting some space and some domain so that you can build your website. So if you don't complete that one at some point, you will not go very far in this module. Yeah. So you really need to get some space somewhere on the servers, otherwise you're going to fail the module. So 20 students have not completed a single activity, so I don't know what to say about them. The only thing is it's not too late to start, okay, because the 5 activities, 20% of the final mark, so there are still 80% to go for, so you can still pass the module if you start today, but you really need to get going. But yeah, as I said, the number of submissions is going down, which is quite worrying. So activity 4, the final deadline is in 1 week. So hopefully we will reverse that trend. Yeah. Hopefully last week there was no lecture, so people have had a chance to catch up a little bit. So we will see, but it's not great so far. Feedback about activity 5. So if we look at the initial deadline, which is 1 week, 6 students have submitted, which was pretty much a disaster. They all passed.
Was the deadline not moved forward because of enrichment?
Okay, yeah, so that was the initial deadline. There were 6 people, there was no question. And then we had a deadline which was moved by 1 week, and we got 55 submissions, which is still quite low, knowing that you have had 2 weeks for doing it. So if we look at what type of social media you chose, you really went for Facebook, 3/4 of the people. A bit of Instagram and Twitter, and a single person tried Quora. Okay, so a bit of feedback. You were supposed to provide functionalities about different social media, and the one we have submitted so far done pretty well, and you have the standard functionality that you will find on all of them, which is dealing with managing members, tagging things, sending messages, and adding links. Obviously, each social media has a specific focus. So some are about friends, some are about photos, short messages, images, and so on. When we speak about providing technologies, some people just provide a list of interesting words or acronyms, And that's not good enough. Okay? When we speak about a technology, the name is important, but a short description would be appreciated as well. So don't be too surprised if we didn't pass the activity because of that. We are becoming a bit more stringent than at the beginning. So now you should know better, so please, when you answer a question, try not to have them too short. Okay? We don't want an essay, but a few lines are generally what is required. Technical challenge, obviously has to do, the constraints has to do with the internet and the web browser, for example. So there are issues of bandwidth, type of software, streaming, and so on. You were also supposed to provide a list of software that could be used. And some of you did some very good research. That's what Pushpa has reported. But again, when you are providing your answer, don't just throw a URL. Some of them are not very explicit at all. They can be very long and you don't know what the tool is. So again, before, provide at least the name of the tool, maybe a couple of words describing what they do, and then the URL. And when you were supposed to recommend some analytical tool, it's for your specific social media of interest, the one you have been studying. It's not just for any of them, because each tool has specific feature which fit better one type of media or another. So the message is, the people who did it do it pretty well, but we would like a bit more of a description of your answers. But the main issue is too many people haven't engaged in that activity yet. It's time to get running on that. Okay, so today we are going to focus on PHP to get you started, to give you the basis so that you can start investigate further and make your website more interesting. So as I said a few weeks ago, a web page can be divided in three parts. There is the content, there is a structure, and there is a style. So structure and style, we had a lecture on that. That's mainly HTML and CSS. You have the basics, so now you are free to investigate and get better at those two parts. And then there's the content. So already on your website you have some static content. So you have some text, some images, you have embedded a video, and you have some links. Okay. But all that is static. Each time people go back to your website, they get exactly the same content. Okay. So either regularly you update your website and add some stuff, otherwise your website is not up to date, people go once, twice, and then they never go back in anymore. Okay? So, except if you are really dedicated and add content, static content all the time, that's not the way forward. So really what you want to do is your website to be updated automatically somehow. Okay? Or at least provide some features where people can run some kind of application, some kind of applet, so there is some interest in coming back to your website because they will have some kind of different experience. And for adding dynamic content, typically, you need to use some programming languages, and JavaScript and PHP are the two main languages when we deal with web pages using some HTML framework. Okay, so PHP started the story of PHP started in '94. There was that guy Ramus Lerdorf, coming from a Nordic country. Can you recognize the flag? Greenland. Excellent. So it was coming from Greenland, and I guess in those remote places where there are not that many people, the internet is quite important. And basically he had a home page, but it was not happy with the static features. He wanted to be updated dynamically. So he's a hacker, so he decided to create some hacking using a language called Perl in order to maintain automatically this home page. Okay. Nothing was available at the time, so he did it himself. And he called that hack personal homepage tools, obviously. So it looks a bit like PHP. And obviously he was not trying to make any money out of that. What he wanted is updating his web page. So he released his hack and allowed people all over the world to contribute in order to have a tool which would become more and more powerful. So it's an open source project, basically, which started from nowhere. Basically, the bedroom of that guy somewhere in Greenland. So that started in 95, so that's 20 years ago. And so that was, 95 was the version 1, and now we are at version 5.6. And somehow the name has changed a little bit. So now PHP doesn't mean anymore personal homepage, it means PHP hypertext preprocessor. So what does the PHP of PHP hypertext preprocessor mean? It means obviously PHP hypertext preprocessor. So it's an iterative name. So you can see that it was created by hackers. Okay, they're having fun. You know, they like programming iterative stuff and embedded stuff. So that's the name they gave. So it's free to download. It's open source, so it has been open source for 20 years. And the great thing is that PHP supports most databases. So we'll be looking at MySQL very soon, early in the new year. People who are really interested in databases will study Oracle here, which is the biggest, the most important one, the most professional ones. But there are plenty of others, and they are all supported by PHP. PHP runs virtually on any type of operating system, Windows, Linux, Unix, Mac, and so on. Compatible on most servers. Okay. In principle, you have a domain based on a server using Apache. That was my recommendation. So you should have a PHP engine on that server already installed. Okay, so now that you have a bit of background about PHP, and you can get your clicker out. So that started 20 years ago, a single guy in his bedroom. There are other stories in IT about single guy in the garage. So you don't need a big tower for doing good stuff. So now when you are creating a website using some basic framework, I would like you to guess or to tell me what are the main two frameworks which are now used on the web. So you can choose between, there is PHP, there is Flash, there is the ASP.NET, so that's the framework offered by Microsoft, but it's open source as well. You have Dreamweaver that you may have seen around. You have G2EE, so that's a framework for Java. And then I would like you to find which of those frameworks are the two most popular ones. Yeah. So some of you will know, so have some ideas, some will just guess, and that's fine. So give it a try. Let's try to see So we have 41 answers so far. Getting to 50. Yeah. Okay, let's look at the outcome. Okay. So 1/3 of people believe that PHP and ASP were the more popular ones. People also believe in PHP and Flash. That's true that very often you see those Flash websites, and usually they are a bit annoying, are they not? You know, it needs to load, and it's actually a technology which is getting out a bit. It's not the modern way of doing things anymore. ESP Dreamweaver, and then the Java environment as well. Nobody went from Microsoft and Java together. Okay. So the right answer is the wisdom of the crowd, as often. So PHP and ASP.NET are the most popular ones. So well done. So we have seen that now PHP is now part of the two best. So for a little open source project we started in a bedroom in Greenland, it's a great project, a great success. So now it's widely used for websites. And what is great as well is that there is this whole community of developers which are helping the development of PHP. So it's not just one guy who started it and is trying to maintain it. Now you have hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people contributing to it to make it a tool which is always better and performing very nicely and fulfilling their needs, because obviously the needs are evolving. In 20 years, technology has changed so much that obviously you need to add features all the time if you want to keep the language relevant. So here are the statistics for November 2015. So here we are looking at the top 10,000 sites. Okay, so top 10,000 sites means that they are the professional sites. Okay, the ones which have a lot of traffic. And you can see that PHP has 30% of that market and is number one. ASP.NET, so that's the Microsoft alternative, has 17%. Then you have the Java framework at 9%, then Shockwave Flash Embed at 5%, Adobe Dreamweaver at 3%, and so on. Okay. So PHP is the leader on that market, very closely followed by ASP.NET. So that's when we look at the top 10,000 sites, so that's the professional sites. Obviously, the picture, once you look at the whole of the internet, is going to be different, because professionals may not be using the same tools as individuals. Yeah, makes sense? So let's look at the picture for the whole of the internet. So here you can see that basically amateurs, which are adding to the professionals, they are using PHP and ASP.NET. Okay, they have each around 40% of the market, and then you have 20% sharing the other technologies. Yeah. So as a professional in IT, you should definitely consider PHP, ASP.NET, and I would say the Java framework as well, because it's very powerful. It's not always needed, but for specific websites, Java can do things that others cannot. So there are the three main environments. I mean, you have already started studying Java. Yeah? JavaScript, which has nothing to do with Java, apart from the fact that the names are a bit similar. We are going to look at PHP, and we will be doing much more PHP at Kingston. And we are not going to look too much at ASP. So if your aim is to become a web developer, I would suggest starting looking at ASP.NET in parallel, because that's one of the two main technologies, and if you want to specialize on that, you need to know about it. Obviously, the concepts are all pretty similar, so if you know one environment extremely well, dealing with the other one is not going to be a very big deal. Okay, so if we look at what type of websites are using PHP, so PHP is used mainly for businesses' websites, for technology, shopping, adult content, news, entertainment, and social media. Okay, so you can see that a lot of professionals, especially in the business part. So if you want to follow those trends, again, that's one of the things of the IT Toolbox philosophy, is that's the trends this month. Okay, I try to update the data because this IT world is changing all the time. There are always some new disrupting technology around the corner. So what is true today may not be true tomorrow. So that's the position today. It's quite possible that at the end of your degree, the situation will be quite different. So you need to follow those things. Okay? There was an article yesterday about Flash, saying, I think Flash is not a technology of the future. People are leaving Flash, and it's not going to have a future. Okay? So you need to know that, because when you look at my pie, Flash seems to be still quite an important player. But in 3 years' time, it's unlikely it will still be there on the chart. Okay? So you need to follow those things. So use those links and regularly update yourself, because today it's PHP and ASP and Java. What is it going to be tomorrow? Okay, so let's look at a bit more into the details of PHP. So it's a programming language. Okay, so the first thing, it's a programming language which can do so many things. So it's not like HTML that anybody can grasp very quickly in a few hours. It's a full functional programming language. So if you want to master it, it's going to be hard work. Okay. This is a language which is procedural. Okay. You must have heard about object-oriented languages. So that's the most modern framework for languages, like C# and Java, for example. The functional languages were somehow the previous generation of languages, like Fortran and C. And then you have C++, which is a hybrid between functional and object-oriented. And PHP, at its origin 20 years ago, was a functional language. And because of the fashion and because of the value of the object-oriented framework, it has become object-oriented as well. But it's not a pure object-oriented language, which means that if you want, you can just treat it as a functional language. And if you want, you can treat it as an object-oriented language. And some people use a bit of both in the same development, which means that the code is very dirty and very difficult to follow. But again, it was developed and it's maintained by hackers. And hackers are more interested in being of performance than about style and writing very readable code very often. Yeah? The language itself has a syntax which is very similar to C, C++, Java, or C#. So you will find the main structure, condition, while loops using the for statement. So if you know C, C++, Java, most of the syntax will look familiar if you move to PHP. And the other way around as well, if you start to master PHP, you will have already a head start when you are starting looking at C, C++ or Java. Since there is a huge community supporting the language, there are a very long list of libraries which are available. So if there is a special functions that you would like to implement for your website, it's likely that one of those guys have already done it for you. Okay? So very often you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You need a function for doing a specific things. If it's something that other people have needed in the past, usually you will have a PHP function available which is going to do it for you, which is great. Again, PHP is developed by hackers, so it's hacky, okay? Which means that it's not always well organized. There are some functions which look a bit funny. You know, it's not you can feel that there is no cooperation behind it, which try to standardize everything. It's a whole community contributing, okay, with its pros and cons. So it's particularly well designed to be integrated in web servers. Okay, I mean that was the initial aim, and it remains. So basically, you write your HTML code, and inside your HTML code, you add a few PHP lines. That's the way you are going to use it. And PHP particularly good to access data, to go into database, look for data, retrieve, edit, and so on. Another thing is it's interpreted language. So there are two families of languages, the ones which are compiled. Okay, you write your code using your favorite language, you compile it, so it's converted in a code that is directly readable by the machine. Okay. However, in this process, it's checking that your code doesn't have any single error, otherwise it is not going to compile, it's just going to complain. Okay. So the value of it's compiled, it means that it's converted already in a code that the machine understands, which means that when you run it, it's going to be very fast. Okay? And you know already that there is no error in your coding. Doesn't mean that there is no bug, but at least all the instructions that you have written belongs to the language. Okay. Then you have the interpreted languages, is when you run them, it takes each line one by one and try to convert it in a language that the machine can understand. So it's done line by line. Okay. So if you have an error in line 20, it will run very nicely until line 19, and then it will stop. Okay. So which means that for debugging or for scripting is pretty good, it's very fast. You don't have to go through that compiling step. Another thing is that when you compile, you make your codes readable for a specific machine. Okay, you are going to compile your code for a Windows machine, a particular type of PC, or for a Mac. When you are staying at the interpreting level, it's at the time of running it, your machine is reading it and converting into the code of your machine. Okay? So So it means that an interpreted code is usually portable. You can use it on any type of machine. Okay, so what is the relationship between PHP and HTML? So basically, it's PHP is embedded within your HTML code. So a PHP script is an HTML page with a few PHP instructions. So as you can see, the PHP instructions start with a tag which makes clear that it's PHP. So here we have a simple code where PHP is going to look for the date of today. So it's going to look on your computer what is the clock on your computer and give you the time. So if we look at my web page, we can see that it's a dynamic web page because it tells me that it's 9:40 and 1 second. And if I refresh it, now it's 20 seconds. Okay, so this web page is dynamic. Each time you go on it, you get something different. Obviously, getting the date and the time is not the most exciting feature, but it's already a dynamic feature. Okay, and I have done that just by adding an extra line in the middle of my HTML code, which is print date. And then you have different parameters depending on what format you want the date to be shown. Do you want to get just the year, the name of the day? Do you want it in the American format, the British format? Here I want time, hour, minutes, and seconds. Maybe you don't want to display the seconds. So you have many parameters to the function date, which allow you to customize the output of that function. So typically, you can go on the PHP website, and you get information about all the parameters you can have for date. You can see that you have a very long list. Okay, so you can really get the information you want, and only the information you want. Okay, so that's a very basic way of using PHP. Okay, calling some specific functions which are going to retrieve some information, up-to-date information. You remember this very important diagram that when you are downloading a HTML page from a remote server, the server is going to send you that HTML page, and your browser is going to read that HTML page, is going to read possibly the CSS files which are associated to that page, and are going to display it according to those instructions. When you are dealing with PHP, the process is very different, because your computer, your browser, doesn't understand PHP. Okay, it's too complex for it. However, your web server understands it. So if you want to get the information, a web page which has been written in PHP, the web server where this PHP page lives is going to translate it for you. Okay, so it's going to read the instruction, going to read the code, and if there are some calculations, they are going to do some calculations. If they need to find the date, they will look for the date, but that's going to be the date on the web server, not the date on your machine. If in order to display the page, you need to access some kind of database, again, it's the server which is going to access that database. It's it's not your computer. Okay. So basically, the web server is going to run all the PHP code and find the outcome of each of those PHP functions and calls you are doing. And all these PHP answers are going to be coded into a HTML format. So basically, taking the PHP code, solving all these function calls, get the solutions, write that solution in HTML, and now you have a full HTML page, and then send it back to you. And your computer can understand that HTML. So if we look at my web page, which is there, so you can see that it has the suffix PHP. Okay, so that's a very important thing. Each time you have a web page with PHP inside, the suffix needs to be PHP, it cannot be HTML. Okay. So it's PHP, and if I try to get the source of my code at the place where the date is, you don't have the PHP code anymore, you have the actual information which has been retrieved by the server. Okay? So you cannot access the PHP I wrote for making that page. It's invisible from the outside, because when you access the page, you get just a translation of the outcome into PHP. Okay? So at the moment, on that page, this page appears like a HTML page where the time is 40:20. If now I refresh the page and I look at the source again, now it's 46:01. Okay, so that's one of the beauty of PHP is you can write all the PHP code you want. Nobody will know what code you used. Okay, so you keep some kind of secrecy about how you developed your web page. If we want to look at the actual code, so you cannot use that button, view source, so you really need to see the source on where you developed your page. So if we go to IT Toolbox, let's open it. Okay. And here you see the code, which is in PHP. Okay. Have you already downloaded Notepad++ or something equivalent? You can see that it's very neat. It has recognized my code as being PHP. You can recognize all the HTML tags, recognize the PHP tags as well. So it makes your development much nicer and easier to track bugs. Okay. Okay, so we are going to look at different applications of PHP that you can implement directly at the end of the course, of today's course on your website. Okay, so we are going to be very practical. We are not going to look at the most complex aspect of PHP. We're going to look at things you can do today. Okay, so first example, you could add the date and the time on your website. That's just 2 lines of code, it's there. What is very useful is to use also PHP in order to create very consistent web pages, because very often a web page has a structure with some kind of header, some kind of content, and some kind of footer. Okay, and the header and the footer is going to be the same for all individual pages. Okay, so somehow it doesn't really make sense to duplicate that each time you create a web page. So one way of solving the problem is to use PHP. Okay. So what you are going to do, you are going to have one PHP file, which is going to be with the code for your header, one PHP file which will be the code for your footer, and then you will have your PHP file with your content, and in this PHP file you are going to say, add the header code before, add the footer code afterwards. Okay? So here is your first file. So you start, so if we remove that line in the middle, that's the skeleton of a standard HTML file. Okay? So you have the tag HTML, you close HTML, you have the head, you have the body. Okay? So what you can do is to have a file where you only provide that information, and that's going to be your header file, and another file where you're going to provide that information, which will be your footer file, and then the file of content is going to include those two files, and they are going to bring all together in order to create a unique page. So let's have a look at, so that's your page, your standard page. So that's a PHP code. What you are going to do is this page, the first thing you need to do is to include that page with my header. Okay. So it's just PHP is going to understand it as copy and paste. Copy the text which is in this header.php file here. Then you put your content, and here again you are going to copy your code with the code which is coming for the footer. So if we look at my web page, this one. Yeah. So that's my page. So the part I want to keep common is basically the logo. Okay, I want all my pages to have this logo, and this logo is associated with links, so I can link to either university or the faculty. And then I want all my pages to have my email address at the end. So I don't want to duplicate that, especially that maybe the university is going to change logo tomorrow, they're going to change the color. I don't want to go through my website and change every single page. Okay. Here, I just need to change the header page, file that I have for this website, and all the other pages automatically, since they are doing a copy-paste from that when they are interpreted, will get the new logo. Okay, so that's the web page. If we look at the header page, that's what we have. And if we look at the footer page, I just have my email signature. Okay, so I'm just concatenating 3 files to get one web page. Any question on that? Is that clear? No? So let's look at it. Let's look at the code itself. So that's my header file. So I have the head tag. I start with the HTML tag. Then I have my head tag, so that's the title of my web page. Then I give some, I'm not using CSS here, I'm just using the old HTML to make it maybe a bit simpler, not to call too many files. And here I have my logo, university.gif, and I have some links on the university website and the SEC faculty website. Okay, and if you look at the file, So this logo is made using what is called a table. We don't have to worry about that. You can see that I start my body tag, but I never finish it. Okay, and I start my HTML tag, I never close the tag. So it's an incomplete HTML file. Okay, there is only the start. The end of that file is in my footer.php, where I want to provide my email address. Then I close the body tag, and then I close the HTML tag. So now if I put these two files together, I have a proper valid HTML file. Okay. But what I want to do is, in between, I want to add the content I am interested in. Okay. So that content is coming from this file. No. Is this file. So here I have my content, and here I have a PHP call saying, please copy here everything which is in the header file. So I am adding my HTML tag, my body tag, I'm adding the logo and so on. And here again I do a PHP call, and I'm asking to copy everything which is in the footer file. Okay. So by adding these three elements, I have a complete web page with my content. Yeah? Is that clear? So which means that none of the three pages are a valid HTML page, but when I bring them together, they are. Okay. So typically, a website will be using a strategy like that: one header file, one footer file, and then plenty of content files. And I will be reusing header and footers all the time. So, as I said, the advantage is very easy to maintain and update your website. Any change in your email address or in the logo of the university, of their links, I can change it. I change it at only one place, and all my web pages will be automatically updated. Okay. So we have already seen two basic usages of PHP. Very simple. So now let's look a bit more about the functions that PHP is offering, because so far, I mean, I've told you that PHP was a programming language. So far, it has been extremely limited. Now we are going to look at a bit more advanced functionalities. So it's a programming language, so there are basic functionalities that you would find in any programming language. First, you can handle string of characters. Okay. So you can convert from your code, a string of character into capital letter. You just call the right function. Or you can extract each single word, or any function that you would be using with a standard programming language on strings, you will do that with PHP. You can also have mathematics function. Okay. If you want, for example, to program a video game, you need to generate random numbers. You don't want things to happen always at the same time. So by using random number, you can change the scenarios quite nicely. If you want to do some programming involving some geometry, you have all the trigonometry functions which are available. It has all the structure, if then, else, and so on. You can deal with time and dates, and you can read files, write onto files, and so on. So that's all the basic tasks. And for people who are used to other programming languages, such as C, C++, you will find that very often the functions are a very similar format. Okay. So that's the basic functionality that most, or even all programming languages will have. And then you have some functionalities which are more to do with PHP philosophy. PHP is mainly for dealing with databases, okay? Contacting a database, extracting information, writing into a database. So there is a whole lot of functions which allow you to contact a database and retrieve information. Obviously, we are working on the net, which is a very dangerous environment. So PHP is allowing you to use an encryption. So when you are communicating with your server, you can encrypt all the messages so that nobody can get them if they are listening to you. And then there are many functions, as I said, that it's a hacker community. So there are functions that they find useful, and they just provide them. Okay, so they will provide you free text translation. Okay, so if you want to convert your website from English to another language, it's very likely you just call one PHP function and it will do some very bad translation, I guess. But it will do some kind of attempt. It will provide you some spell checking, will deal with images. And then it's getting more and more hacky, some very crazy functions that maybe you never thought of. Okay, so we are going to look at, so if you go on that link again, on the PHP website, you will have the list of all the functions. And we are going to look at one function which is called the soundex function. Anybody has heard of that function? So let's look at a website using that function. Okay, so it's a genealogy website. Okay, so if you want to track your ancestors, you may want to go on that website. And the issue is that in genealogy, sometimes names are changed. Okay, people are writing by hand, at least when you look at older records. So my name, Nebel, you know, if you write it very quickly, maybe you are going to write Noble instead of Nebel, okay? And also because of accents or people changing their names, sometimes it's difficult to follow your ancestor just by focusing on your exact name, okay? You need to allow variations, okay? So for example, if I type my name, the soundex code is going to say, yeah, your name could be written these three ways as well. Okay, they sound a bit similar. They're quite interesting alternatives, but that's my name. Okay, so when you are going through the database of this website, and I want to look for my ancestors, I'm going to look for those people as well, because there is a chance that someone at the registered office didn't hear your name right and wrote it in one of those ways. Okay. Similarly, if I write my first name, I have plenty of options. Okay, so you will have some spellings which look a bit Germanic, although which are English, and so on. So they give you, so it's quite an interesting function because it's not about how you spell your name, it's more about how it would sound, okay? And they allow you to have a bit of flexibility. So instead of looking for the surname Jean, you are going to look for the code G500, and all the people with those surnames will be retrieved as well in the database. Okay? So you can see that it's quite an interesting function. It's far from being a standard function. Okay? So you can see it's some kind of hacker which hopefully obviously was interested in genealogy, and I am fed up to try all the type of names. Okay? I mean, already there is the issue between British English and American English, already the same word will have different spelling, but it's going a step further by just looking at the sound. Okay. So, as I said, there are plenty of those interesting creative functions that are part of PHP. So maybe you will contribute to PHP. Okay? I mean, that I think would be quite good on your CV. You know, you say, yeah, I'm part of the group of people maintaining PHP, and I've contributed by providing a function which does so and so. Okay? So that shows your involvement in the IT community and your development skills as well. Okay? So feel free to take part in open source projects. I think you will find it very rewarding. Okay, so in programming languages, obviously you are dealing with variables. And again, there are two philosophies. There are languages where you have to declare variables. You have to say, okay, the variable date of birth is going to be a number, or is going to be an integer. And then the variable name needs to be a string of characters. So there are some languages where you have to declare that formally before using those variables. And there are some languages which are more relaxed. It's at the moment you are using the variable that it declares it for you. Okay? As soon as I say my date of birth equal 1980, it's going to say, okay, that variable is a number. Okay. Obviously, because of that flexibility, sometimes it's going to make errors. Okay. Sometimes it's not going to understand exactly what you mean. And if sometimes you use your variable as a number and sometimes your variable as a string of character, maybe it's not going to complain, but it will give you some very strange results. Whereas languages which are more rigid, you declare once and for all that this variable is an integer, and if you try to use it in another way, it's just going to complain. Okay. But when you are doing some coding which is not too long, it's very nice because it's very quick. Okay, you save one line of code each time you use a variable. So the convention in PHP is that a variable starts with the $sign. Okay? And here is a small code, a small PHP code. So I am entering here I have two variables. The first one is what is my date of birth. I define it as 1980. And I am collecting the current date using the date function. Okay. Here I'm just collecting the year. So now I can do some basic math. Okay. What is my age? So basically is this year minus the year of my date of birth. And then I can use, for example, some kind of if statement and say, okay, if I'm over 30, I can be considered that I'm not a young chap anymore. If I am less than 30, I'm still a young person. Okay? So that's a very simple piece of code that PHP is going to be using. Okay? Obviously, again, it's not very interesting because PHP is going to do all over again the calculations with the same numbers. Okay? Once and for all, I am entering my date of birth. Okay? So again, for the user of the website, it's going to be static. each time I'm going to get the same thing. So if you want it to be really dynamic, ideally you would like the user to be able to enter values, and according to the values they enter, age are going to be calculated, and some comment is going to be provided. Okay, so they will be customized according to what the user is entering. So you would like something like that, maybe. So I'm not really in web page design, as you realized. I keep them minimized just to highlight the functionality I'm interested in. So you could have a web page with a form. So you have seen many of those web pages. So I enter my name. I press the submit button and say, welcome, Jean, you are 23, you were born in 92, and you are still quite young. Okay. Now, I can enter another number, and I'm telling me that I was born in 37, and I'm not that young anymore. Okay? So now the website is a bit more interesting because people can enter some values. You are doing some processing, which, I mean, this one is not particularly interesting, but you can do some interesting stuff and provide some customized answers or replies. Okay? So how to do that using PHP? Okay, so there is a very important tag in HTML. So remember, PHP works with HTML. So some aspects are HTML, some aspects are PHP. So in HTML, you have a tag which is called form. Okay, so obviously it provides you a form. On that form, you can have a set of variables. So the form that we have seen, there was one variable with a name, and there was a variable with my age. Okay. So in HTML code, I have to use that tag, input type text. Okay. And I have to specify for each input what variable is going to collect that information. And then I want to add a submit button. Okay. And when I press the submit button, what it's going to do is going to go to this action, and I press the submit button and going to send the information to that PHP file. Okay. And on the PHP file, it's going to collect that information. Okay. So in black here, I still have some HTML, and then there is some PHP code which is collecting that information. Here it's telling recover the value of the variable fname, recover the value of the variable age. Okay. And here again, I am recovering what is the date of today, what is the year. And I'm doing my basic math again. I am calculating what is the current year minus my age, which should give me my year of birth. Okay? And then some little comments where I'm according to the age value. Okay? So is the concept clear? So you have a form which is in HTML. When you specify what are the variables you want some fields to be provided to the user, you add a submit button, and you need to specify that when the user presses the submit button, it's going to a PHP file which is going to analyze that information. Okay. And when we are looking at those forms, there are two types of forms. There are the forms which are in the get format, and there are the forms which are in the post format. Okay. I didn't mention that, but here, when I speak about the form, here I specify its post format. Okay. And when I am on the PHP side, again I specify I'm on the post format. I'm going to send my information in the post format, and I'm going to retrieve it in the post format. You could do the same using the get format. Okay? So why are there two formats? Just to make life more complicated. So as you can see, they are used the same way. You just need to change the keyword. So when you use the get format, you are going to send your variables to the PHP page. And using the get format, these variables are going to be made visible in your browser. Okay. Since it's going to be visible in the browser, it cannot be too long, okay, because you have a limit of 2,000 characters. And since it's visible, everybody can see that information. So obviously, you cannot use the get, or you shouldn't use the get format if you want to send some sensitive data. You are not going to use using that, a form with a password, within the get format, for example. However, the beauty of the get format is you have your web page, and you have somehow a new URL with the values of all your variables, which means that you can bookmark that URL if you want to. So if you don't want to refill in the form all the time, you can just use that specific address, and the form somehow has been already filled for you. Okay? So which means that if you have a website where you fill a form which does some processing and a new form and so on, you can come back at any step you wish without to come back at the very original one. Okay? The alternative is the post format. So in this case, your variables are invisible. They are not visible anymore in the URL, which is good in terms of confidentiality. And because it doesn't need to fit in the URL string, it has no size limit, so you can have as many variables as you want. Okay? So depending on the application, you want to choose the most appropriate of the two modes. So if we go back to my wonderful web page, okay. So here I'm in the get format. What's happening? I guess I didn't get the right page. Useful. Okay, let's try post format. No, why is it not working? It's just the famous demo effect. Oh, I know why. You know why?
Because you're using the HTML file.
It's because I'm using PHP using my local file, and my machine doesn't understand PHP. So it cannot do the calculation, which makes a lot of sense. So what I need to do is to go on my website, which is on a web server which has PHP. And now I can use, for example, the post no, it's not the post form. And now I get the calculation because the PHP, the server understands PHP, my browser doesn't understand PHP. And here you can see the URL. It's used for post, but doesn't tell me anything about variables. Okay. So now if I go back and I use the get format, you can see that the values are here. Okay. So if I wanted to, I could bookmark that web page and carry on, maybe with some new questions, and I don't have to fill in the initial one. Okay. So that was another application. Now you can have forms, collect data, and do some kind of processing with those data. The issue is those data, they are not saved anywhere. Okay, you are processing them on the flow. To keep a record, potentially you can keep the URL if you use the right format, but it's not the ideal, for most applications it's not what you want. So what you really want to do is to save your data somewhere. Okay? So you want to work with some kind of file system, so you can enter values, save them somewhere, and recover them. Okay? So there are two ways of doing that, either using a database system, and we have seen, or I've told you that PHP is really designed for that, okay, to work with database system, to write and retrieve data. But we are not going to do that today. We will be looking at in the next lectures. But what you can do is just write it into a file, without any specific structure. And if you process it appropriately, you can still get saving some values. So an example is, that's common on many websites. They like to count how many people are coming on that website. Okay. So we are going to do that now. How many people have been on your website? Okay. So when you are an exciting website as mine, obviously there is a lot of traffic. Okay. So I have already 2,186 visitors. I guess I've had more than 2,000 students, so everybody has been once and never been back. Or maybe I've cheated a little bit. Maybe I didn't start the counter at 0, but at 2,000, so I look more important. But it's a dynamic feature because if I refresh, so at the moment is 86. Now I'm 87. And I want to feel a bit more important, so I can refresh a couple of times more, and very quickly I will be at 3,000. Okay? But you can see it's a basic functionality, but already it demonstrates that it's saving some variables somewhere, and I can update it, recover it. So you have already the basics of file handling with PHP. Okay, so here is the whole PHP code. So I have a variable which is the name of the file where I'm storing my data. So here my data is just a counter. And here is my PHP code. I'm first checking that that file exists. Okay. Then I open that file, Then I'm going to read what is in my file. So I'm going to retrieve that number, the current number. Then I go back at the start of the file. So that's this rewind. I had that number, but you have just been on my website, so I need to update that number by adding 1. And now that I have a new number, I need to save it, so I'm going to write it in my file again. Okay. And then I close my file, and I can put some message that you are visitor number, whatever. Okay. So it's a very simple process. First, I check that the file exists, retrieve what is inside, make sure that I go back to the beginning of the file, update the counter, write in the file the new value, close that file, and then I can display on my web page the number. Okay. A few things. Files have some rights. Okay. And it's especially important when you have files which can be accessed on the internet. So a file, typically when you are running on a Unix system, which is the one which is the most sophisticated, you have different types of users. You have the person who have created that file. You have a group of people associated with that person. And then you have other people. So I've created that file, so in principle, I can have the full control of that file. I belong to a group of people, so if I want my lecturer or my colleagues, I'm very happy for them to see my file, but maybe I don't want them to change it. Okay? So we'll say, yeah, you have the right to read my file, but you don't have the right to write on my file. And then I don't want the external world to look at my file at all, because it's a file which has to do with academic things. Okay? So for each file you are creating, you have to choose what rights you give to which person. Okay? Obviously, here I have a counter, and I want basically anybody to be able to update my counter. So it means I need to give read and write files to everybody who is going to go on that web page. Okay. So that can be dangerous. If someone wants to mess up with my file, they can. Okay. On the other hand, the risk is not very high because the information which is there is not that critical. Okay. So here, when I open my file, I write it R+, which means this file, I am going to add, I want the right to read and write. Okay. And here you have the full description of all the modes you can have. So you can execute files as well, for example. Okay, so that's just a basic way of handling files. And you have the code here. Obviously, the best way to do it is using a proper database system. Here are a few of the ones that are compatible with PHP, but we will see that in a future lecture. You need to get some basics about databases, some basics about MySQL, and then how to integrate that into PHP. Okay, so when we are using MySQL, just for people who are really keen, because I've noticed each time I give you an activity and then people say, yeah, it was nice to do a web page in HTML, but what about PHP? Tell me about PHP. And I'm sure that next time you're going to say, yeah, it was nice to do PHP and to write in a file, but I want to do it with a database system. So if you are really keen, okay, you have some the MySQL queries. If you are using a MySQL database, all start with the keyword MySQL, which is very handy. So that's all the PHP functions. So obviously they have those functions for all the databases they are compatible with. So they try to have a format which is quite consistent. So you can connect to a database, you can get database system, you can select a specific database, you can do some query, you can write, and you close your database. Okay. So, but we will see that in details when we'll be having a lecture on that. PHP, as you have seen, is a leader on the internet, so you have a lot of resources. You can download PHP if you want to. You have some nice tutorials. If you haven't yet a text editor for your development, you can use gedit, for example, which is particularly good for PHP. And then, in addition to all those functions that those hackers are providing, you have websites where people provide some full applications using PHP. Okay? So you can just go there, get a piece of code, and integrate that in your website. Okay? Because as we have seen, we cannot look at the source of a PHP because you just get HTML. So if they want to keep it hidden, you will never see it. But generally, people are very happy to share their code with the community. So a little clicker question. As you can guess, you will have to now add some PHP to your website. Okay. So the first question is it going to be necessary to install PHP on your machine? Okay. So what is your, you could say, no, I don't need PHP because my browser understands PHP. You could say, no, I don't need PHP because the server where the data are can understand PHP. Or you can say, no, I really need it. I need to install PHP on my machine. So let's see what you think. Okay, let's look at the 55, that's a good number. Wow. I'm very happy that 69% of you are following the lecture very well. Okay, well done. You can, a round of applause, you have done well. So, your browser doesn't understand PHP. Please, there's still 10 minutes for the lecture. So the browser doesn't understand PHP, and you have seen it live. I made the mistake. I took the files which are on my machine, and the browser couldn't understand the PHP, and because of the stress of the demo, I made the mistake and couldn't, at the moment, quickly discover what the problem was. Okay? So your browser doesn't understand PHP, but the host will understand PHP. So if you are trying to access a web page in PHP which is on the server, it will be converted in HTML and sent back to you. So the answer is B. Okay. So in your activity, you will have to write some PHP, obviously, and we will see that on the next slide. So you don't need to install PHP on your machine. Okay. The way to write your code is you write your code on your machine, obviously. You copy the file on the server, and then you run the file from your machine and check if it does what you want. Okay? And that's okay, and that's the way I suggest you do it, but it's a bit cumbersome. Okay? You have a file, you change the line, you have to copy it on the server, run it, now there is a mistake, and change the line again. So since here you are going to write 20 lines, it's okay, okay? However, what you can do is to install PHP on your machine, which means that you don't have to copy on the server all the time. Your machine will be able to understand your code, and you save that copying. Okay? So you don't need to do it, and you know the reason why, but maybe you want to do it. That will make your development easier. So if you are using PHP only for very small things, I don't think it's worth the bother to install everything. However, if you want to do quite a lot of PHP development, you will need it on your machine in practice. Yeah. Okay, so let's look at the exciting activity of this week. Yeah, it's getting serious now. Okay, so I want you to create a dynamic web page, and I want your web page to do something useful. So I want you to convert units of something into something else. Okay, so you can convert miles into kilometers, you can convert pounds into euros, convert potatoes into apples if you want to. I mean, you know, it doesn't really matter. You do it the way you want. And obviously you will need some kind of PHP for doing that, because you will need a form where people are going to enter the value, 10 pounds. You are going to have a submit button, and you will have your PHP code, which is going to say, okay, 10 pounds, knowing that the rate pound-euro is 1.5, the answer is 15 euros. Okay. At this stage, if you are using miles and kilometers or ounces and kilos, the number is fixed. Okay. If you are using currencies, the numbers change every day. Okay. So ideally, you should collect to a database from the London stock market or wherever, which is going to tell you what is the exact value of the pound today for doing your correction. But in this activity, we are going to assume that it's static. So if you want to play with currency, you can hard code a value. Okay? But it's not the right way of doing it, but it's just an exercise. On the other hand, if you are dealing with distances and weights and so on, that's not an issue. So here is an example of what you could create. So here I have a little menu. You don't need to do the menu thing. Okay. So here I want to convert kilometers into miles. I enter 100 kilometers. I press the calculate button, and it's telling me it's equal to 62.14 miles. Okay. Very simple function, but it involves already some understanding of PHP, form, and so on. So that's the first part of your activity. And then I would like you to integrate a cool and advanced script. Okay? So I'm not asking you to write something very complex. I just want you to go on one of the websites where people offer many scripts. Okay? Find something interesting, something which can enrich your website. So that's one, for example. Okay, so you have a nice calculator. Okay. Here I have a nice calendar which tell me times of sunrise and sunsets. So today is the 13th, sunset at 6 p.m. and sunrise was at 6:58.
That's October, it's November.
Excuse me?
It's the wrong month.
October? Oh, you're at November, you're right. Yeah, it's in red. I must be colorblind. Okay, so sunset is at 4:07. Okay, so it's quite early. And sunrise was at 6:46. So you can see that they are quite nice applications that people can find interesting on your website. So go on one of those websites, whatever website you want, where they give you the code for that, and try to integrate that within your web page. Okay? So it's not about understanding every single line, but you need to understand where to put it, what is the initial function to call, where you get the result from. So you need to have some basic of understanding of what's happening. If the person who developed it have written a very nice manual or help file, it will be easy. If not, you will have to go and get your hands a bit dirty to understand what's going on. Okay. And reminder, you don't need to install PHP, but you may want to. Okay. Thank you very much for your attention, and Pushpa will be here next week.